Okay, I think I'll slowly get going with welcoming everybody to today's webinar. Today we're going to touch upon whether or not you really do know your suppliers. And I'm just going to start you off with the agenda. I'm just going to kickstart it with a bit of information in terms of, setting the stage for what we're going to talk about today. And then I'm going to hand it over to Roman, who will answer some questions. So I'll wait by introductions for that. Let's just get going. I think there are still people joining, but let's just slowly get going. All right, so just to set the stage of where we are, I just wanted to touch upon sort of the difference between traceability and transparency, because I think that's maybe also top of mind for many of you to figure out how to work with these two different types. Now, traceability is something that Roman will also touch a lot upon later on, because that's really about tracing the history, tracing the supply chain, tracing where do my things come from, where almost down to tier 4, the farmer level, where does it all come from? And the other part of it is this transparency. How do we work with transparency as a company? How do we work with actually giving information, the relevant information to end consumer, to B2B, wherever we want to put our information out and be transparent as a company? So those two are different, but of course very much entangled in the way daily work and what we really need to prepare for, and definitely also one of the reasons that we're here today for this webinar. Now, it is about, of course, understanding where do my things come from? When we produce something, when we manufacture something, when we source for something, and when we in the end want to sell this further on, where does it actually come from? And of course, our suppliers are one of the greatest and most important part of this, because tracing it back is reliant on the fact that we know our suppliers and we know that their suppliers and their suppliers, etc. So it's reliant on the fact that we actually know where it comes from. But it can be really complex. And that's, again, why we're here today, to sort of touch upon the fact why it's so complex. Because as you can see, and this is actually a more simplified version of it, it can be even worse than this. And that's how the reality is, especially in the fashion industry. We do have so many links that we need to be aware of, that we need to work with, that we need to, in the end, try and map for us to understand and work with these different suppliers and their supply chains. So why is it necessary? Now, one of the things that I know many of you are experiencing already and have experienced that for quite a few years now is, of course, this very big demand for information, for data. We have a lot of e-commerce platforms, a lot of key accounts for us that really, really needs this information. And they're asking for more and more information. The more legislation hits us, the more that reporting requirement hits the bigger companies, the necessity for data, the necessity for information becomes more and more extensive. Now, these are just examples and real-time examples from different key accounts and e-commerce platforms that have asked our customers for information, where they, of course, sit back and think, how do we get all of this information? How do we ensure that we have all of this information? And that's why it's so necessary, because we know where the information is going to come from. And if that's, of course, supply chains and our suppliers. And that's touching upon the trickle-down effect. That's sort of what we've been calling it ever since, because when you have a big e-commerce platform, you have a big company, you then ask for data, who then asks for data, who then asks for data. And that's what happens in the supply chain. And even though that we do think that is, of course, a hassle for us as brands, as fashion brands, we further pass on this data need from our suppliers and then from their suppliers. So it has this trickle-down effect throughout the supply chain. And that's definitely something that Roman can also talk a bit about in a short while. Now, just to give you this as well, this is an overview from the Danish Chamber of Commerce in Denmark. So this is borrowed from them, but it's an overview of the very many different legislations coming our way as fashion brands. This is just put in so that you also have this overview. And of course, it changes. We keep on trying to update it together with Danske Erhverv. So of course, some of the things changed. It did, of course, with the election change as well. And some of them are already in implementation and ready, especially the CSRD. So this is just to give you this. And of course, this presentation will also be shared with everybody afterwards. Now, let's just, this is just my final slide before I introduce. So this is just to emphasize what we've just said, that sustainability goes hand in hand with technology. We need to realize the fact that there's a need for technology, and coming, of course, from Delogue as a platform, and now speaking to Retraced, Roman from Retraced, that's, of course, what we want to emphasize today, that if we want to evolve in this ever-changing landscape of the textile industry, there's actually no way to do that without the technology. We need that to be able to deliver the data for survival. So without further ado, that brings me to introducing and presenting Roman, who is the Director of Partnerships at Retraced. Thank you so much for joining me today, Roman.
Thank you for having me, Anja. Happy to be here.
So what I wanted to first of all ask you is to introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your role here at Retraced.
Yeah, my name is Roman. I joined Retraced 4 years ago. That was also the time when I joined the fashion and textile industry. Back then, still a small company. I started out in business development, looking for brands who wanted to start their journey in digitizing their sustainability management. After a couple of months, we had acquired some small sustainable brands joining us, and we needed someone to take care of them. So back then, I took over the responsibility of managing all our clients, respectively brands or suppliers, and of course their suppliers, so the users in the end, so all the users. And for 3 years, I had the chance to build up this department and work with a multitude of different stakeholders along the supply chain in doing traceability projects, collecting environmental data for LCA projects, working on due diligence projects regarding certification, audit results, corrective action plan management, putting them into place. And I did this for 3 years, and since beginning of this year now, I took over the responsibility of managing partnerships at Retraced, as we see it as super vital, how we as Retraced can become an ecosystem. And so how can we create the ecosystem the industry needs? And this is, of course, only possible via collaboration and partnerships with other stakeholders. So this is my challenge since I've been working on since beginning of this year.
Amazing. Now, for those who don't know Retraced yet, can you tell us a bit about what is it that you do?
Yes. So Retraced is a sustainability management platform which allows brands and suppliers to collaborate on. You can envision it like a social platform, like a LinkedIn, a Facebook. Every facility, every brand, every retailer has their own profile. And in the end, we help in the collection, in the analysis and the disclosure of this data. You mentioned all the legislations which are coming towards us, which are hitting the industry, which are, of course, requesting a huge amount of data. Yeah. And we help to manage this. And if someone goes through a process with us, it's all about exploring who is part of one's network. Of course, direct suppliers, but also what you mentioned earlier, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, so all the indirect ones, who is part of my network. And afterwards, we have identified that we can start collecting a bunch of data around certification, audits with their findings, documents in any form, simple data points around environmental data, emissions, etc. And once we have collected all this data, we can start analyzing it and see how are certain risks, social risks, environmental risks, governance risks in my supply chain. And then someone can prioritize, really seeing, okay, where can I have the biggest impact? Where can I work on my due diligence with my partners and improve the status quo? And this is where we then come into place with a solid risk management tool where corrective and preventive actions can also be managed. And last but not least, of course, to report, using all this data to report, or to simply share it with consumers via a digital product passport of today, which can either be integrated in a website or directly on the product with a QR code. Funny wise, this is actually how we started back then. So in 2019, there was this idea of being transparent and giving a digital product passport to companies so that they can show who's part of their supply chains, who was involved in manufacturing these products. But back then we quickly realized, oh, data is pretty scattered and no one has that data really under control. And therefore we got this, or we pivoted towards this idea of becoming a sustainability management platform, helping to collect and manage this data. And after a certain while, we put traceability as a foundation because it's so relevant to know who you're working with, and it's actually pretty difficult to figure this out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So the difficulty is that, does that also lie in the collaboration with the suppliers? I mean, is it are they finding it difficult to adapt to this new way of doing things?
I think the question is, why are we doing it? For many decades, we didn't need to do it.
No.
No one cared what is happening in these supply chains. We didn't have this, it's often called the tsunami of legislations coming on or hitting the industry. You mentioned you showed the graph earlier. All these legislations, they have different focus points. Some on, corporate sustainability due diligence, really seeing, okay, how is the social state or the environmental state in the supply chain? Do we need to improve? Then we have all these product legislations with the Eco Design for Sustainable Products regulation, for instance, where we will be forced to have a digital product passport on each product. We will need to show what the product environmental footprint of a product, how is reusability, durability, like all these circularity topics around a product which need to be covered. And just to now, I mentioned two of these laws, so CSDDD and the ESPR, different types of data needed for them. And we have to collect so much different types of data from so many different entities or stakeholders along the chain that it just becomes super difficult if you start doing everything manually. And right now it feels, or I feel everybody who starts doing sustainability management for its company and for its network, it's a huge manual effort and it takes so much resources, and it feels sometimes that we are not working on sustainability anymore because we're just working on data collection. And the industry, unfortunately, is, as you said, so complex, and data is scattered and the quality of data is not always there, that many need to keep or start ordering the data and putting it into a certain location where they can easily share it with others. And to cope with all these laws, I think we need to get fast, and data collection need to get painless. And of course, the initiation phase is kind of painful, because if you haven't worked like this with your partners, or you have never done it, of course, in the beginning, it's tough for yourself, for them. But once you have created a data standard, once you have put everything in order, you can really start feeling the benefits of it. And you can become faster again, or collecting data maybe in real time, so that ideally you can focus again on, or that you can focus on improving your social and environmental impact in your supply chains.
Yeah, exactly. So the importance
of course, be compliant. Be compliant.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the most important. No, it's not. No, it's what's driving the industry, unfortunately.
Yeah. But it's also in a matter of thinking that, being compliant, and do you want to be more than just compliant? And that's sort of the gap between, do we just collect data for status quo, or do we actually do something about the data that we are collecting? And that speaks into your due diligence tool, I guess, because that's where you actually get to use the data collected, right?
Yes, exactly. Because in the end, what you also well showed on the first slide, you have traceability is not specifically transparency.
No.
Traceability leads to transparency, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And then in the end, it's what you do about it. Many see transparency also being transparent to consumers,
Exactly.
but it's also creating this transparency for oneself and for business partners, so the suppliers. So where are we standing? How is actually the current situation? And this you can only do if you have a solid data structure. You know what you should do to have the biggest impact again on really on uplifting yourself and your suppliers together. And I think this is really something new in a way, that this collaboration or the relationships between brands and suppliers, they are heavily strengthened because they are sitting in the same boat.
Yeah,
And I think
exactly.
formerly it was two different kind of parties sometimes seen.
Yeah.
And it's really relevant to change the way on how generally everybody's collaborating.
Yeah.
I think collaboration is the key to success, to solve a multitude of problems in the industry.
Yeah.
And of course, one of these problems is maybe really uplifting or improving the relationships between brands and suppliers, and having this shared ownership of these products which are made and sold in the end. And the brand couldn't do it without the suppliers, and the supplier couldn't do it without the brand. So demand and supply is of course driving it. And but now we have of course this responsibility towards
Yeah.
the planet and the people,
Yeah.
change something.
But what do you think in terms of, because one thing is the direct supplier brand collaboration, but then you also have the supply chain. So when you have the direct supplier and then their supply chains, possibly down to tier 4, where do you know the complexity of that? Where do you see that as a troubled for the industry?
Yeah, of course, the maturity of data
Mm-hmm.
is a big one. The maturity of digitization along the value along the supply chain is a big one. It is really resource intensive, and everybody who starts the journey needs to invest a specific amount of time and resources in the beginning to set up the data foundation.
Yeah.
Once the data foundation is there, and let's say you have set up all your sustainability related data in the platform, you have done a product setup, you have your orders in, and then it's just connecting the dots.
Yeah.
But in order to connect the dots, you need to create the dots. And I think here it's really relevant it's possible and doable, but it's really around trust and support, explaining the why someone is doing it. And this is not just for your direct suppliers, but even going further and joining calls with them, with their suppliers. And then there's still this, as mentioned, trust. Like, how can we're not overstepping someone, which is also a huge, fear
Exactly.
sometimes from suppliers. And then, it's the size of a supplier or company is of course also relevant. If we have the big ones who have everything already, let's say they have PLM, ERP systems, they are maybe vertically integrated, or they have such a strong relationship with fabric mills who just know where the yarn is coming from, and then the spin. So I would say that there isn't a recipe on how this is successful, but with time and resources, everything is doable.
Yeah.
And I think over time, platforms like ours, it will even become easier to input data, set data up. And here, of course, technologies like AI are playing a huge role, to digest this huge amount of data in a certain way, to standardize it, because it's all around standardization. We start talking the same language, because then everything becomes easier in point of sharing. And
Exactly.
and then again, handholding. I think it's not a technology is great, but in the end, it's still human people or humans who are using it. So it's really being close to these parties, and that's from the brand perspective, but also from us as a technology provider. We also try to bring a huge human part into it, and really handhold and support, specifically in the beginning, if someone sets or starts working with us, or if a new supplier joins the platform.
Yeah, the transition is sometimes a bit hard, right? To get used to
Exactly.
working a different way.
And it's just different. What I mentioned, like for decades, no one asked for this data. No
No.
one asked to be on a platform, and now suddenly they have 6, 7, 8 platforms they need to join. And so interoperability, harmonizing data, super relevant for the industry to overcome this.
Are you experiencing, it might be a leading question a bit, but are you experiencing that these supply chains are getting a more simplified, you know, in terms of both suppliers and maybe also brands leading towards it being a bit more simplified to make it easier?
I don't know. I think a product itself leads to simplicity in the supply chain. So if you look at a t-shirt, or if you look at a backpack, or I don't know, whatever it might be, or a jacket, like a winter jacket.
Yeah.
You have, I don't know, it can vary between, I don't know, five bill of material pieces to 100 or something. And then of course it always depends on what is your goal, how granular you need to go, want to go, what is actually the ratio between resources and output, resources, investment, and output. Because again, you mentioned all these legislations formally. Someone needs to prioritize. I think prioritization is the big key, to also not overload oneself and also not suppliers. And so supply chains can be really complex, but it's not that I don't have data to support to say, yeah, suddenly everybody has super lean supply chains. I think it's still pretty complex and constantly changing and figuring out subcontracting, etc. It's not simple. It's not. So I would rather answer with no, it's not simple. And maybe there are changes, but yeah.
But do you think that we've mentioned a couple of things that they should focus on, but if brands should sort of prioritize, where do I start? I have all of these legislations, I have all of these requirements from the bigger key accounts wanting a lot of different information. Okay, where do we start? If we're not really there yet, we don't have the right technology yet. Do they start there? Do they start with their supply chains? Where do they actually start? In your opinion?
So there are two drivers, which you mentioned also formally. It's the legislative driver. You are impacted by a law which is going to come. You are selling to certain markets, hence you are, you don't have a choice. You're impacted by this legislation or law. And then, of course, you have an intrinsic motivation. You might want to do things, or you want to be prepared earlier, even if it hits you in a couple of years. Generally, starting earlier than later is the key. And then again, starting small. It's not so much. So if, for instance, we are, as a German company, we started out in Germany. It was all around the Supply Chain Due Diligence Law Act. A German company does not need specifically to trace, at least not now. They don't need to. In France, for instance, if you follow the AGEC law, you need to trace, you need to identify a CMT or assembly where your fabrics have been coming from in the wet processing. And you have also some small due diligence around it, but also not so much needed. And being transparent, so DPP. We have a lot of clients in Asia, for instance, suppliers, manufacturers who sell to the United States. So they were impacted by the EU Forced Labor Prevention Act, so that they have all their chain of custody documentation ready if an order should be withheld at US Customs. They don't need to do due diligence. So in the end, it's a bit, what is your biggest first need or goal? And it could just say, hey, I just want to gain more transparency, and I just onboard my direct suppliers and I start declaratively asking them, and I do mapping, who is part of, where are their fabric producers coming from? And then I start maybe simply collecting certifications, audits, documents. It doesn't need to be an LCA project immediately. It doesn't need to be, I want to identify the farms, because also set yourself achievable goals for yourself, which are also in line with the resources you have at hand. I think if you want to do traceability and you say, I have 200,000 orders, or I don't know, like this huge amount, or even 5,000 orders per year, tracing 5,000 orders is damn difficult and it takes a lot of resources. So maybe start with your main suppliers and maybe choose a couple and go big with them, try to trace all their orders with 5 instead of going with all of them. So I think here it comes a lot to have a partner next to one who can help with this. I think they are not alone. For instance, as we see ourselves as experts in defining these roadmaps and really defining or helping in the prioritization, because we have done it 100 times now. So it becomes easier to help also with the decision making process, what to focus on. And of course, experts in the field. So
exactly.
Natural.
Cool. All right. So in terms of, because I know you also have towards the direct end consumer, your solution, how important do you think that it is when we talk transparency towards the end consumer, information? What are your is maybe also in the different countries if it's different, but in general, what are the expectations from the end consumer?
So generally speaking, of course, we see a trend. Sustainability is relevant. Climate crisis, social unfairness, let's say, or human rights topics popping up everywhere. Still, I believe consumers, the small bubble really cares about it and is willing to pay for it. The bigger chunk is still deciding on quality and price. And if I don't know, need to pay my electricity bill at the end of the month or my heating bill, I will rather go for this instead of now buying a super expensive sustainable product. So I think this is still the reality for our brands or partners who work with us, and who it's the transparency at the end is kind of the cherry on the cake.
Yeah, it's
your final step. It's great when you have it, when you can do it, and it's also a goal. So they want to be transparent, but then it's not. You don't start with the DPP. You start with, I don't know, traceability, or really identifying who is part of your network, how are the standards. So there's a process someone goes through. I think consumers' responsibility will be increased heavily with the Eco-Design for Sustainable Products regulation, to make someone aware of their role in the value chain. So now we're not talking supply chain, but value chain. The upstream has all the data, how something has been made, but it's known that a consumer, with his decision on how he cares about his product and what he does with it, has a huge impact on the environment. Wherefore the EU is now pushing for circularity to reduce emissions along the value chain and to create new business models around it. So how can recyclers, repairers, how can all of them have the right data at hand? And how does, for instance, a consumer know how to treat the product, for instance, when it's broken, or it needs to be repaired, or it lost, it has reached end of life, what to do, how to dispose it in a certain manner, how to wash it in a certain. So consumers will be taking on their responsibility, and I think the market will evolve further, but right now it's still a bit limited. And most of our clients are not using it yet because they have so many other things to do. But we have clients who do it, and as mentioned, we came from a DPP back in the days, which we needed to start at the end to understand what is actually needed. So it was a bit our process of thought on what the industry needs.
Makes sense. There is actually one question that I just wanna put in here, because now we just touched upon many of the different solutions you have, and there is actually somebody who's asking, competitive wise, how are you different than your competitors as this type of solution you are? You differentiate yourself.
We really we always focused on, so the fact that we started with due diligence, and we only put traceability later on top of it. We have a huge focus on due diligence, and we have a really solid risk analysis to really help to hotspot ESG risks. We have a solid corrective and preventive action management tool, or functionality feature, whatever you want to call it, which then helps to work on these issues. So we have a solid due diligence set of modules. And then we were lucky enough to have the right partners when we developed traceability, which is also a super solid solution, because we had the chance to develop it directly with a vertically integrated supplier who wanted to digitize from farm to ginning. So we developed fiber forward first before we developed product backward traceability. Product backward, you start at the garment, you follow purchase orders, but we started actually following shipments. So input, transformation, outputs on facility level. And by having worked on this with a supplier, and later on worked on it further with Better Cotton in a huge pilot project on fiber forward, we have actually super strong traceability. And as mentioned, we have a DPP, which was, let's say, the initial or the inauguration of Retraced back then, this green marketing tool. Wherefore we have solid functionalities in all these aspects you need to comply to any kind of law. Wherefore we are quite modular. So we have the capabilities of being interoperable with a multitude of parties. So we could, like you could, let's say, work with another traceability provider as an example. The provider could send us all the data and we would do your due diligence. And then you might do a DPP with someone else. So we are so flexible that also brands for us who work with us, we can again prioritize. But you have a long-term partner, a sustainable one, which will be at your side. And let's say, as mentioned, the manufacturers or suppliers in Asia, they do just do traceability, but maybe in 2 years from now, they also want to, I don't know, do their due diligence and do much more vendor compliance management. And the brands in Germany who started with due diligence, they just do due diligence. So we are not overloading them. Hey, you also need to use our traceability suite. So it's always adapted, and we're quite, so we have a pretty standardized tool, which is super customizable, usable to some extent.
For whatever they need in terms
exactly.
of
And you will need the full
right?
suite. And that's why I think we always, we see ourselves as 360-degree sustainability management platform, which of course makes it also more tough because we have more to work on. But quite eager on that. So I would say this is the biggest difference to our competitors who, so we're competing to different companies in different models.
Yeah, cool, perfect. Let's see, there is also a question of how is Retraced helping in streamlining the process of gathering data on our products from our suppliers. Could you explain a business case to give an example of streamlining the process of gathering data?
So we are streamlining. So as mentioned, we are like a social network. Everybody has their own profile. A supplier, multiple facilities, each facility has their own profile. And a brand, you will be connected to all your direct suppliers. Once you have traced, you will be connected to all your indirect ones. And a supplier on the other side will be connected to all his clients and to his network. And once you have set up, let's say, your data foundation, meaning all your certification audits, documents, you have set up your product database, your component database, you have connected your components to your products, so you have a bill of material for each product. Could also be collected via traceability, this information. But in the end, once everybody's set up, we are streamlining the use of this data so that you can share it with a multitude of parties and you can make use of it in an efficient manner when sharing it with others. And I think here we call it the network effect. Make use of the same data which is asked over and over again. Of course, you will have different purchase orders for different clients, or for different, or you will have purchase orders for different suppliers, and they will have different sales orders for different clients. But once you have set up your foundation of products and components, these they stay the same as the certification stays the same. And by sharing this transparently with your clients, so from a supplier perspective, there can be even initiatives to collaborate on, I don't know, corrective action plans, on audits. You can start collaborating once you gain this transparency. And this transparency is only doable once you start understanding better and creating it for yourself and for your partners.
Cool, thank you. And now there are not many questions, not any questions now, so I will turn to the future as a final thing.
All right.
Let's just say we go towards the future. Where do you think the future of supply chain, traceability, fashion industry? How do you think it'll go the next? Maybe we can shorten it down to about 5 years, let's say. But at least in the future, where do you think we're going to be as a fashion industry?
So we will still be there. Maybe as a positive start. We will definitely still be there. I think there will be themes we need to tackle. as a global industry. It will not be so much on a national perspective, but really needs to be set globally on data harmonization, data governance, so that we have the right foundation to be interoperable. So that we, I don't know, name products in a certain way, or that we have a glossary we can map it towards too. That we all start, being harmonized in a way, so that data collection becomes faster. This is needed so that we can become interoperable from a traceability perspective, for instance. So that also we with our competitors is like, it will not be so relevant anymore on which platform you work. For instance, for traceability will be like, I don't know, Retraced is Yahoo and someone else is Outlook, and we will be able to send us orders to one another, and we will have the same structure on how this is received, and it doesn't really matter anymore on which platform you will be working on. And I think this will happen. Not sure if 5 years is, I hope 5 years, to be honest. Because it becomes more and more difficult. Otherwise, and next to that, I think, let's say, looking above and beyond traceability, I really feel that the industry needs to become this huge ecosystem of organizations which have all their respective expertise to some extent. And we know that data is lying in a multitude of different platforms, and that there lies data which has high quality, which is verified. Now specifically thinking about multi-stakeholder initiatives, auditors, certifiers. And you shouldn't be working in a multitude of different platforms. And I think what I mentioned is everybody has their own expertise. And we as Retraced, we are not on site. We are somewhere in the digital sphere. And we will never be on site to actually check something. So for us, it's how do we get high quality verified data into a tool, and that, I don't know, you have entered your data somewhere and had been checked by someone, but you also wanted to have it in 10 different other platforms, and you should have the right to not enter the same data again over and over again. So it's really, how can we create this digital twin of the industry? How can we create an ecosystem which is so interlinked that we can manage this vast amount of data? And I think this would, ideally, this is the future I'm hoping for, and which I'm working on in my position also at Retraced. This is really, was actually funny, like when I was still working with brands and suppliers, my daily job was their problems in collaborating and working together and setting this up. And now it's kind of a level higher. How can the industry really be? How can we transform the industry in such a way that we overcome these challenges which we just mentioned, or which I just mentioned.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, but my hopes are up and great. And
we're hopeful. We're positive.
Yes, it's just it's crazy when you know the reality and the state we are in at the moment.
True. Yeah, definitely.
So as mentioned, data is really scattered, and digitization wise, we're also not where we should be, but it's also super cool topics to tackle. Yeah.
Definitely is. And I think in some cases, there are a lot of different people you speak to now, not necessarily sitting in a brand, but the ones outside the brands, saying that this is maybe also a bit about time, sort of for the industry to sort of catch up in terms of a lot of other industries that have been in the digitalization for quite some time now, where we as an industry in fashion, it is just, we've been just hiding a bit away from the digital world, and now we really have to enter it, and it has to go in a warp speed in terms of legislation.
I have this example. Right? Someone who describes it like, we need a Formula One car, or like a super or a hypercar, like a super fast car, and literally we have a Bobby car right now.
Exactly, it's a good comparison.
It's really. We're really still. I have this comparison also. Like, it feels like we want to climb the Mount Everest. We are like, you and I, we start Googling where's the Mount Everest. You know, like it's like we haven't even started training for it. You know, so it's still a long time. But the products in the industry, they are not as valuable maybe as, I don't know, as diamonds, or I think also maybe compared to food, where also much more is regulated and there's so much more safeguards already.
Yeah.
Fashion and textile was just easily overlooked, let's say.
Exactly.
And now we are not overlooked anymore. So everybody needs to understand that starting earlier than later in making experiences, right? No one is
Yeah,
expecting to
exactly.
be perfect, you know. Or just I think starting to start doing something and having a good partner on one side to evolve is the right way forward, because
Yeah.
it will come. Like,
Yeah.
just as a crazy maybe thought, ESPR, every product sold in Europe will have to have a DPP. I think it's crazy, you know. Every product, doesn't depend like how big or small your company is. Everybody will need to do it. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah.
In which way or what
Yeah.
will be demanded from
Yeah,
companies.
exactly. Yeah. It's going to be an exciting year next year when we get the specifications.
I hope so. I hope we get them. Like,
We've said
no.
25, so
Yeah, let's see. But yeah.
there is actually a relevant question here. I think in terms of do you think we can learn from other sectors? And if yes, how?
Mm.
You mentioned the food industry. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I think so. I'm not an expert in food or I don't know, automotive, but I think what they did, and what it feels at least like, is that the entire governance around data and specifically the standardization
Yeah.
um, around data, they did it
Yeah.
a couple of decades ago.
Mm.
And I think here there will also be decisions needed to be taken.
Mhm.
And I think we need to understand that these are global decisions.
Yeah.
Creating a technology standard is a global one. It's not nation by nation, like with the legislations, you know, like where you will have a directive and then each country still does a bit again what they feel like. You need to collaborate on defining these standards and how data is treated. And if we make this, then, and I think here we can learn from other industries who are much more, collaborative on this point.
Yeah.
I think it would be super. I think this is the point how to move forward. But again,
Definitely.
it's a global decision, and let's see how. So I think the EU is doing great here. I think the UN plays also a huge role, which could force certain protocols on a lot of countries around that. We're super close to that, so I think we're part of a lot of working groups around these topics. Data governance, incentives for data, structures. There's so much happening. There's so many working groups and consortiums, and what is happening with SIRPAS or SIRPAS 2 is also amazing. And I think these are all these projects which are pushing the industry forward in a certain way that at some point we hopefully have a glossary of data on how we talk, or we have a certain standard or protocol how to send data from one party to another.
Exactly.
So yeah.
Perfect. And then a final question here: to push the circular economy, is Retrace planning to a digital twin in order to create markets in sale and recycling? There are a thought about that. I think
To
it's
be
quite
honest,
interesting, actually. Yeah.
so we heavily work on the supply chain, so on the upstream.
Yeah.
We have partnerships with DPP providers who are much more specialized in this and who also see the focus much more on it.
Yeah.
So I think there's an entire way on how do you gamify it, you know, how to resell it, what could be so cool, how do you create the connection? Because I think once you sold a product, you can track ownership, and there will be ways in which I don't see, which I'm not expert about yet, which would be possible.
Yeah.
And it's needed to actually empower what I mentioned earlier with the responsibility of consumers, and to empower consumers to understand the value behind their products and what is actually needed or required from them to treat it well. And but yeah, again, maybe in 5 years from now, Retrace suddenly also is heavily working on that. I cannot say this yet, but we will always have a DPP. And if there are others, again, we are super modular, as mentioned. So
Yeah.
if there might be needs to be a bit more reseller focused, we are also happy to provide data which has been collected to other parties who might be more specialized than we are in this case.
Perfect. Great. No more questions. I don't have any more questions. Roman, this was so interesting. Thank you so much for joining me today, everybody. And thank you so much, Roman. It was very interesting. Wish you all a very good day.